Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Maria Shakil. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first visit to Washington, D.C. under Donald Trump's second term was high on optics as it was on substance, with hugs, praises and big deals. The meeting was described as excellent by Prime Minister Modi, who stated that their talks will add significant momentum to the India-US friendship. Donald Trump declared that Prime Minister Modi was a tougher and much better negotiator than him. Trump also announced expanded US military sales to India from 2025, including F-35 jets, along with increased oil and gas exports to narrow the trade deficit. Both sides agreed to negotiate a trade deal and finalize a new defense framework. The two leaders also launched a US-India compact for the 21st century, aiming to catalyze opportunities in military partnership, accelerated commerce, and technology. Donald Trump also confirmed that the United States has approved the extradition of Tahavur Rana, a Chicago-based businessman accused of playing a role in the 2008 terror attack in Mumbai. One may say that there is a lot of deliverables for an administration less than a month old. Overall, both sides seemed comfortable in commonalities, emphasizing on continuity.
Nice to see you again.
We missed you. We missed you a lot. Here's some of our friends. It's really an honor to see you, and you've been my friend for a long time, and congratulations on having done a great job. Thank you.
हम दोनों का मिलने का मतलब 1+1 2 नहीं, 1 और 1 11 होता है। मैं समझता हूं पूरी दुनिया में डील शब्द का कॉपीराइट एक ही व्यक्ति का है और उस व्यक्ति का नाम है ट्रंप।
He's a much tougher negotiator than me, and he's a much better negotiator than me. There's not even a contest.
मागा प्लस मीगा तब बन जाता है मेगा पार्टनरशिप और प्रॉस्पेरिटी।
And this is a special broadcast where I am being joined by Nikunj Garg, who has been tracking the story very closely from Ground Zero in Washington, D.C. for the last few days. We are also being joined by Ashok Malik, partner of the Asia Group and chair of India Practice. We have Matt Klink, Republican strategist, Prameet Pal Chaudhary, who is the South Asia head of Eurasia Group. William Buiter is joining me from North Carolina. He is an independent economic advisor. Dr. Arvind Gupta is the head of Digital India Foundation. But before that, Nikunj, coming to you, one thing became clear that in this dialogue of democracies, the two sides were extremely comfortable, emphasizing on commonalities and also talking about continuity.
Well, that's an interesting point you raise, Maria. I was in fact noticing very closely and very keenly the body language of the two delegations that were accompanying the president and the prime minister. And I saw that the American delegation was far more relaxed than their Indian counterparts and our Indian delegation. Whether it was because of the fact that they felt reassured by the conversations between the president. Remember, they also walked into the room some 15 to 20 minutes later than our delegations, which means that they probably had an extra spend of time, or they probably discussed the entire thing before the Prime Minister and President walked into the White House's press conference room. Now, they were far more relaxed, their body language far more calmer, and they were responding quite actively while the two leaders were commenting to the press. Indian delegates initially a bit tentative once the two leaders walked into prior to that, then slowly settled down in their body language and were keenly observing commentary and questions from the press, particularly from the non-Indian press, as is the case in most of the times. So my sense is that dialogue went well. Foreign Secretary summed up when he said that the most contentious part, that is the tariffs that were being discussed, according to me, overhyped. But Foreign Secretary said that it came up naturally in the course of discussion, and it did not come up obsessively or compulsively, and therefore it indicates that there was no extreme pressure or high pressure from the American sides on the tariff also. Talking about tariffs, by the way, right now where I am in Washington, D.C., if Xavier can pan the camera to the other side, this is the Federal Trade Commission of the United States of America. This is the place where the American interest on the trades and tariffs is decided solely for the purposes of America, out of the purview of any kind of multilateral bodies. And that's what President Trump has been hinting. So this is the headquarters of the Federal Trade Commission of United States of America at the Capitol Hill. Behind me is, of course, the Capitol Hill, and then the various federal buildings of United States of America. Now, as far as the dialogue is concerned, my sense is that if any meeting or any apex of the political superstructure symmetry could have progressed well, then that has happened in the case of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump. Remember, it's yet not been a month that since the time President Trump has come into office, but he has had meetings with Prime Minister Modi right in the very first month. And keeping that in mind, the whole expanse of the relationship that they discussed and the results and the outcomes that have been announced by both sides in a very congenial atmosphere, in a very non-aggressive atmosphere, completely uncharacteristic of President Trump, and the way he was waxing eloquence on Prime Minister Modi, calling him a great leader, quite clearly goes on to show a large degree of personal chemistry enjoyed by these two leaders. And my sense is that that has played its role, and that has been beneficial to this relationship, not to India alone, but to the relationship of the democracies, which many neutral observers are now actually pegging as a force for global good. Maria?
All right, Nikunj, continue to be with us and pitch in with questions to the panelists who are joining us. Ashok Malik, your thoughts on what played out just a few hours ago. Everything seemed right there. It was also clear that there has been a great degree of groundwork which had gone into what appeared to be just a perfect bilateral meeting.
The one thing which does strike me after reading the joint statement is that just how conventional, of course, very aspirational as well, but conventional the joint statement is. It talks about technology cooperation, it talks about co-production, it talks about technology transfer to India, it talks about working together, it talks about a mobility arrangement that allows for the mobility and travel of talent across both countries. None of these could have been predicted from the first joint statement with the Trump administration. And these are, in fact, quite counterintuitive to much of the rhetoric we've come to associate with the Trump administration with other countries. Obviously, there is a greater degree of comfort with India. There is an enormous continuity that he wants to inject into the India partnership, continuity from his first term in office, also from the Biden administration. All of this is contingent on a bilateral trade agreement being reached by September 2025, when President Trump is likely to visit India. He's looking at an expanded trade partnership. He's looking at $500 billion by 2030, which is a high benchmark. But more immediately, he's looking at greater market access by September and a much smaller, if not zero deficit. Quite honestly, Prime Minister Modi and his diplomats have delivered as well as they could have. Now it's over to the Commerce Ministry and the trade negotiators.
Okay. Nikunj?
Well, yes, I have a question actually for the Republican strategist that you have on your panel, Maria. And I wish to ask him that, see, campaign rhetoric is one thing. President Trump is coming straight from his campaign, hot from his campaign, just 3 weeks back, inauguration happening. But how much is it realistically possible to push big trading partners or push trading partners like India, who are equally important otherwise, minus the trade, in terms of the strategic sphere, in terms of the people-to-people contact, in terms of their ethical democratic behavior? How much is it realistically possible to push such partners, given the fact that the need for cooperation is much greater than the trade?
That's a great question. And I think that, campaigning is one thing, governing is something entirely different. However, I will add that I think what you're seeing with Donald Trump, not only in the meeting with Prime Minister Modi, but in other meetings with, other in-person meetings and telephone meetings, Donald Trump has been incredibly well prepared so that the things that he advocated for on the campaign trail, i.e. cracking down on immigration, free but fair trade, things of that nature, and increased partnerships, those are all coming to pass. And I think that what I believe Prime Minister Modi thought yesterday was, we can be dragged kicking and screaming, or we can find a way to make a deal and make agreements, so that he said MAGA plus MEGA equals mega. I think that from domestic consumption, what Donald Trump achieved yesterday with India, I mean, look, they cut deals on commerce, tech, energy, military, immigration. The U.S. wants to close a $43 billion trade deficit with India. If that number comes down, Donald Trump declares victory. And I think that both America and India's economies can be better for it. So I think that Trump is right now, on paper at least, because as you just said, it's up to the Commerce Department and to the trade ministers to ultimately negotiate the exact terms. But domestically for Donald Trump, I think that he can claim victory yesterday. And it certainly outwardly appeared that Prime Minister Modi was saying the same for India domestic consumption as well.
Nikun, go ahead.
Well, Maria, I think you can pick up that question, that domestic consumption is important, but when it comes to collaboration and cooperation, my own personal sense is that trade would just be one aspect of it. Because remember, there is a Quad, there is a rising China, and then there are international geostrategic compulsions where India has traditionally been a very responsible and very ethical rising power. So I think our role in the world cannot just be seen from the prism of the trade.
Okay.
And you can just pick up that question and take it to your panelists.
Mr. Chaudhary, perhaps you can weigh in on this.
Sorry?
If you can weigh in on the point that has been made, that there's much more to it than a just trading partnership.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case. I think that we saw that Trump has treated certain countries in that list of countries with a trade surplus to the United States differently from others. He has been remarkably aggressive towards, let's say, Canada or some of the Latin American countries like Mexico. He's been relatively, should we say, his language has been a lot less colorful when it comes to India. And he definitely has said almost nothing negative about Prime Minister Modi. I would say that he's actually had a similar sort of language regarding China. So he seems to place a certain number of countries on a slightly different level, either because they have strategic relations with America that he seems to take as important, or there are other elements to the relationship that he takes as mitigating, if you wish, on that front. I think in the case of India, our trade surplus is not very large. He is only focused for some reason on goods trade, not on services trade, where actually India has a much larger surplus. We already have a set of existing high technology supply chain agreements. And he has not only held on to those, though despite the fact that some of that would require manufacturing in India, he's folded that into an FTA. And to my knowledge, this is the first new free trade agreement that America has agreed to negotiate since the failure of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in the Obama administration. And then finally, I would note that, but I would note one other thing, that besides tariffs, we will have one other problem, I think, in terms of this trade agreement, which is the issue of what in trade terms is called national treatment. There is a sense among a number of American companies, especially in the technology field, that there is not a level playing ground in India in both terms of regulations or in terms of taxes and so on. And there will be a very hard push by the Trump administration to produce that level playing ground. This will run directly counter to some degree with the Modi government's Make in India programs and their promotion of national champions. And that is something, again, the negotiators are going to have to keep a very close eye on.
All right, so is reciprocal tax, I mean, more of a proposal of it, can that be seen as an opportunity for India, Arvind Gupta? Because, it does give Narendra Modi a chance to arrive at what can be a level playing field, a mechanism of fairness, as Donald Trump had put it.
So, Maria, I think it's been elaborated very clearly that India has been kind of given a very, very different treatment than all the others that President Trump had kind of indicated. Even though he mentioned reciprocal tariff right before the PM's meeting, I think the two were not correlated. It was a scheduled thing that he had to announce reciprocal tariffs on that given day. But the moment Prime Minister Modi and his delegations meetings got shifted to the White House, I think his body language on that completely changed, given with respect to India. And I think I'll just build on what Nikunjan you had started on saying. So I think India will be in a very preferred position discussing the FTA. It's one of the first of its kind in the new Trump administration. So, both sides will take care of their interests. And the Prime Minister kind of announced that with the MEGA plus MAGA announcement, which was, I think, a brilliant narrative for a brilliant narrative for both the US audience as well as the Indian audience. Both countries need to watch out for their interests, but together they can produce a larger thing for the global best. So that is one thing, but also we have to look at what Nikunj started this discussion with, that there is a lot more things that got achieved in the 24 hours, and of course, a lot of negotiations before that. But look at technology partnerships. President Trump announced that America is a leader in, for example, AI, but India is the equivalent force because the talent pool comes from India. And it is that thing that Prime Minister Modi has always said, AI stands for not only America, India, but artificial intelligence in that sense. So I think this is really coming true. The NSF plus ANRF collaboration and MOU on research. So if you see from the technology perspective, research has been taken care of, critical minerals have been taken care of, AI has been talked about, and autonomous systems. I think that's also very significant. An alliance for autonomous systems is something that I think is a very big achievement. There is AI is on one side, but autonomous systems will be applicable in defense, weaponry, and many other things. So all drone tech and everything else will get covered in that. So how do you make that whole gamut of trust in technology? And I think the one thing that we also need to note is President Trump's statement on dealing with the world's largest democracy, and the fact that it is a trusted relationship, two democratic countries coming together to solve for many of the common issues, and I think that is the premise now which this relationship is built. Of course, and everybody has stated the body language, the chemistry, all goes into fixing this. All in all, I think I don't know how to put it, but I was coincidentally here in DC, and I can tell you the mood is very, very buoyant. There is you couldn't achieve more in 24 hours, less than 24 hours. Then the Prime Minister came in and started his engagements by meeting the Director for National Intelligence till the time he left the Blair House after the dinner. I think you couldn't have asked for more productive 24 hours by two heads of states.
Well, I think that's a fair summation. That's a fair summation that Mr. Gupta makes, that probably it was not possible under any other given set of circumstances to achieve more in these 24 hours what was achieved. Look, diplomacy, relationship between big nations, relationship between nations to begin with, will always remain a tedious and a vexed process. So at any given point in time, you will have issues that will bother both sides, and any given time you will have to look for positives to work upon. So from that point of view, not everything will be at all points in time completely hunky-dory. But as much as possible, my sense is that there is a positive momentum. And Maria, like to ask one question to Mr. Butler, who's joining us from North Carolina. If he's available, I would like to ask that question to him.
Yes, please, go ahead. That's a question to William Boiter, who's joining us.
Mr. William, I wish to ask one question. Look, trade, competition, regulation, everything is fine. But even for private corporations, it is very important, particularly the American corporations, since they deal with the highest end technology possible on the face of planet Earth, that the partners that you get are responsible partners, that they are ethical partners. There has never been a single case of any kind of IPR theft charge on Indian companies. There has never been a case of any kind of patent stealing charges on Indian companies whenever we have worked in collaboration or otherwise. So do you think that the corporate America, of whose a big champion Donald Trump would want to be, also has a stomach to digest to make some extra concessions when it comes to Indian corporations and partnership with India?
I don't think that American companies are ready to make concessions. They want a fair, level playing field. They want FDI into India to be treated the same way that FDI into the US from India would be treated. So I don't think that you get any pressure from the private sector to make meaningful concessions to India. The real issue, the real obstacles, which have not gone away despite the successful 24-hour meeting, is that India has more trade restrictions, including higher tariffs, than sort of any other country, except for a few basket cases like North Korea. Right? The average Indian tariff is 17%. Trade weighted is 12%. The US average tariff is 3.3%. Trade weighted 2.2%. So there is an enormous gap here which will have to be addressed. I know that the reciprocal approach has been given time. We're not going to take decisions on tariffs and other trade restrictions until sometime probably early April at the earliest. But these are issues that have to be addressed. The political climate is supportive of economic and trade and industrial success and cooperation, because India clearly faces in many dimensions the same big rival, China, that the US faces. That's the thing that pushes.
Mr. Chaudhary can elaborate a little bit more on this. The fact is that India remains the world's fastest growing major economy. There is a great degree of curiosity around the India story. World leaders wish to engage with India, and more of it we are seeing play out the elbow room which has been given, the comfort with which all appointments happen. One would say that the groundwork which was laid for this visit of Prime Minister Modi perhaps was happening for the last 3 weeks, ever since the new presidency of Donald Trump. But the message is high. Both leaders are strong nationalist leaders. They are strongman leaders. They are representing two successful democracies. They are also coming in, their arrival at this point is also in the back of electoral successes. That cannot be really undermined, because if you look at it, what Prime Minister Modi said, that after 60 years, government is coming back to power for the third term. Mr. Modi is that Prime Minister. Donald Trump speaking about the popularity votes that he got.
Yes, they're both politically very powerful. And I think what is interesting, if you look at the inauguration of Donald Trump, the people he invited, the countries, the representatives here, were largely from right-wing governments. Meloni, or libertarian ones in the case of Milei, Duterte, and so on. There were the Quad members, of course, India, Australia, Japan were also brought in, and China sent a representative. So there is clearly, and there has been, among Trump's ideologues, if you wish, for example, Steve Bannon in the first administration, have argued that Modi, Trump, and at that point Boris Johnson and others like him represented, if you wish, a right-wing populist wave that was global, and Modi in many ways was the beginner or the start of that. I'm not too sure Modi necessarily shares that point of view, but nonetheless, it's an interesting sense of ideological brotherhood, if you wish. But yes, it does also make them a little difficult at times to work with each other, because there will be a sense that I don't have to concede to what you're arguing. But having said that, I think if you look at Modi's overall economic reforms, he has publicly said repeatedly he wants India to be a market-driven, private sector-led economy. He's been a strong critic of the past socialist practices of the Congress Party. And he has resurrected a dead trade policy, I think after 14 years of not a single FTA being signed by India. We are now slowly signing light ones, but many bilateral trade agreements. We are, yes, geopolitically have said that we will not sign trade agreements in which China is part of. But that makes America actually all that more important. We're also seeing a change in our trade basket. We export more engineering products, and the real surge has been electronics, where India is now, from virtually nothing, is now producing an electronic sector with a turnover of about $100 billion and exporting about $20-30 billion of that. And at the heart of that is Apple. Apple shifting supply chains to India. And so we're seeing American companies, in fact, driving India's trade performance. So, given that, if you look at all the numbers, America is India's largest source of FDI, our largest source of foreign institutional investment, our largest source of remittances. It vies for China as our largest trading partner. They take turns every quarter, if you wish. It makes sense for us to have a trade agreement with the most important economic partner we have to secure these gains. If I am in a company setting up in India, and my company, Eurasia Group, we work with many such companies, they say, if you have an FTA with America and we know where the tariff is placed and we know what the market access is guaranteed, it makes sense for us to set up shop in India and export to the United States. So bit by bit, I would argue, India is becoming a trading nation. The other point I'd like to make, if you remember the Trump 1.0, 2020, they began an attempt at an FTA. It was disrupted by COVID. What they argued, Robert Lighthizer, then USTR, was that the heart of future trade is not going to be about blueberries and cheese. It's going to be about digital product. It's going to be about technology standards. And he said, that's what I want out of the US-India FTA. yes, we'll do a little bit on the blueberries and so on, but the real heart of it is going to be about e-commerce, about cross-border data flow, about all of
Yes.
these issues. That's the future of trade. And
Yes.
that's what you see in this present agreement, in this joint statement between India and the US, a recognition that's where the future is going to be.
All right. Matt, you wanted to come in. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I think that, look, we haven't really talked much about it, but what's really significant here is the agreement to sell India our most sophisticated F-35 jets. We just don't sell those to countries that are out in the world. Only our most trusted partners get access to our most advanced military technology. I think that on top of everything that has been said about India's progression towards a more trade-based economy and things of that nature, the fact that the military technology exchanges and sales are occurring at the highest possible level is, to me, the greatest indicator of India's increased strategic importance and geostrategic military and political the environment. And I think that they realize that, and one of the esteemed panelists said this earlier, that India and the America face the same competitor in China. And I think that the fact that we are going to work closely together and in exchanging military technology at the highest level is indicative of how close Donald Trump wants to be with Prime Minister Modi and the Indian nation.
China, I want to understand from you, Ashok Malik, how aligned are New Delhi and Washington in countering Chinese aggression? And of course, where do their strategic interests diverge? You have to unmute yourself.
That's a question that does not have a pat answer and that will never have an unchanging answer, because as situations evolve, that challenge will also evolve. And we need to see where President Trump lands with China, because even on the China policy, on where he stands vis-a-vis Taiwan and the defense of Taiwan, for instance, there are differences and there's ambiguity even within this administration. So one needs to see where that goes. But there are a few things in this joint statement that are striking. One, I wouldn't want to make the purchase of the F-35 the metric or the benchmark to test the India-US defense partnership. We might or might not buy the F-35, and not because we don't value that fighter, it's a great fighter, but it could just be too expensive. It could be a question of integrating one more platform into our Air Force. However, if you look at the co-production partnerships that have been reinforced, the purchase of the Poseidon, which has been mentioned, the Poseidon naval aircraft, which has been mentioned, the continued purchase of US equipment, the fact that we will be making the Javelin, which is a very old but very effective missile, we'll be making it in India with possible export to third countries. Which means India is working with the US to enhance military supplies to like-minded partners, and in a sense shouldering some of the burden. It's resorting to burden sharing. The language about burden sharing and India becoming a net security provider in not just the Indian Ocean or the Indo-Pacific, but even in the Middle East and the Arabian Sea. All of this indicates a military and defense posture alignment against common enemies and adversaries. They could be pirates backed by Iran in the Indian Ocean, in the West, in the Arabian Sea, or even the Red Sea, or they could be action by China, which is unorthodox and uncalled for in other parts of the world. So it's not just China; it's actually aligning our two countries together in wartime and peacetime. That is important.
Dr. Arvind Gupta, your final comments, particularly with regards to how deftly, many would say, Prime Minister Modi handled the larger question, which has been a huge concern, a lot of political furor back here in India it had generated vis-a-vis illegal migrants. He had an answer to that. He said it clearly that all those who are citizens are welcomed home.
Yeah, I think That's a very important part of the discussion. The Indian state has always maintained it, and PM went very clearly on that anything that is illegal, and migration or even human trafficking needs to be stemmed, because it also has a lot of correlated problems back home. People are selling homes, they're taking large loans based on that, and while we know about the people who successfully kind of illegally migrated, there is a probably another set of people who couldn't and are living a very bad life. So this has to be a very systemic response. He said that, and of course it comes with more mobility in skilled labor and otherwise. And I think even the foreign secretary commented on this, that there is a need for more mobility, and this will all come with more trust. And I think this is one thing apart from the FTA, the defense, that I think we have to watch very carefully. So far, India has been the largest talent pool, as I said, on AI, on technology, on software services. But there are many other areas that India can be a talent pool of a legal workforce. And I think a lot more has to be done. Related to that also was education, by the way, which was brought out. India has 300,000 students studying in the US, contributing about $30 billion annually to the US economy. So, how could that be converted into what President Trump had talked during his campaign period to, a direct green card or a employment authorization could also be looked at as we go along. So I want to leave one comment on China. I think Prime Minister Modi and President Trump complemented each other on the deal-making capacity. They're being the best deal maker. Prime Minister Modi called deal equivalent to President Trump. I think this whole nuance that you're seeing of TikTok ban not happening immediately on the 19th of January and getting a little life of its own also has to do with negotiations that US will do with China. There is skepticism with China. There has to be a lot of, lot more that Chinese side will have to do to build relationships. And India is, of course, the best antidote to the Chinese that we have. So, and that's something that also plays in the mind while doing all this negotiation.
All right, Dr. Arvind Gupta, William Boita, Prameet Pal Chaudhary, Matt Klink, and Ashok Mallik. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Nikunj, quick sum up of this entire 24-hour visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. International press is using multiple words. They are calling it sober, business-first affair. Many are calling it a love fest as well on display between the two leaders. How will you be summing it up?
Maria, it's interesting that you quote the international press. I was looking at the papers this morning. The first thing I did to see how the Washington press reports. Interestingly, Mr. Trump, in his usual characteristic style, said that some of the press that I don't like is also saying that this has never happened in this country before, and these are some of the greatest weeks that this country has seen in a very, very long time. So quite clearly indicating that a hostile press also probably veering towards him and his appreciating his actions. My sense is that I'm yet to see a single headline or a single op-ed piece or a single commentary in the Washington press also, which is overtly critical. People have pointed out that there are real-time challenges that cannot be glossed over with the personal chemistry. People have pointed out that there is real painstaking work to be done on the ground for this relationship to actually become as effective as two leaders would want to portray. But that is all reality check. That's the job of a critical press, isn't it? So from that perspective and that point of view, I would say that from Indian point of view, this visit has been in a sense a successful one, and in less than 24 hours, if Prime Minister could have made India's point effectively, then this was it. I mean, nothing more effective could have been done in such a short visit at a time when President's incumbent team is just taking shape. The full team hasn't even been sworn in yet with the President. So therefore, obviously, this is the right and a very well-made beginning, I would say. And there would be work that is required to be done. But the good thing is that you have now full 4 years of President Trump's term and nearly the same amount of time with Prime Minister Modi available to walk on each of these steps, large or nano steps, to fructify the promises and the overarching promise of this relationship, as I've been again and again saying, not only for the good of the peoples of these two countries, but for the larger global population. And that's what where we leave this one at from Washington, D.C., Maria.
All right, Nikunj, thank you so much for joining us. And joining me now on this broadcast is former Ambassador of India to the United States, Ambassador Taranjeet Singh Sandhu joins us. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. India-US relations have evolved significantly over the past years, particularly during your tenure. How do you think Donald Trump's potential return, in fact, he is in power, how are these issues impacting key areas like defense, trade, and technology? And with the two leaders meeting in DC this time around, in their interesting, political successes, it's Modi 3.0 and Trump 2.0.
So, as you know, that for Prime Minister Modi, President Trump is not new. During what is normally described as Trump 1.0, a Prime Minister had handled him, and they had developed a very good rapport, which has continued. And both the leaders have often spoken about it. This time around, I just want to underline that do keep in mind that President Trump, in Trump 2.0, came on largely a domestic vote on the domestic economy, on the domestic law and order, crime, etc., which is linked to immigration and deportations, etc. So, therefore, a lot of his focus, and especially the initial days, and especially some of the executive orders, are actually focused on domestic. So, keeping that in mind, I think what was very significant was that Prime Minister Modi was invited to come in the first 3 weeks, and they were able to have a good, candid meeting, and a lot flew out of the good equation they share, so that they could speak to each other very frankly.
Absolutely. And Ambassador, Donald Trump had a strong personal rapport with Prime Minister Modi during his previous presidency. We have seen events like Howdy Modi, Namaste Trump. Yesterday, again, those optics were on display. Everything seemed to be perfect, lots of camaraderie and bromance as well. How do such personal relationships between world leaders shape diplomatic ties, and what do you think they will play in terms of long-term strategic partnership of the two countries?
So they definitely have a role to play, because look, the challenges are always there, but those get converted into opportunities. And I think you mentioned about Ahmedabad. It's very interesting, since I was the ambassador here, and in 2020 Feb, President Trump had cancelled his visit because of the impending elections, and there was pressure on through his team for him to do the visit later. And at that time, he had what he always is very fond of calling that I'll give you a good offer, basically 3 days, 3 cities, and in November. But we wanted him to come there. And at that time, I had mentioned to him that Prime Minister Modi is taking a great interest in having the civic reception in Ahmedabad. So when I said Ahmedabad, immediately he said Modi hometown. And when I mentioned about the civic reception, he said the world's largest stadium. And 130,000, he remembered this time. So President Trump has a very sharp memory. And I think this personal rapport between the two will certainly play a role. And it has played. If you look at the joint statement, and you look at very clear 6 areas that have been identified in that, it points to that. We have the defense, we have investments and trade, we have energy security, technology innovation, multilateral cooperation, and people to people. Each one of those is a movement forward. And as it has been described, there'll be actually transformative changes.
And Ambassador Sandhu, both Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have cultivated strong nationalist narratives in their respective countries. In fact, Prime Minister Modi spoke about MEGA, Make India Great Again, just as MAGA is the joining force of the entire Trump narrative. How does this ideological alignment impact diplomatic engagements, and can it really translate into concrete policy gains for India?
So, look, frankly, both of them were comfortable enough to say in front of each other that they follow the national interest. In fact, Prime Minister Modi said that, like President Trump looks after America's national interest, I look after India's national interest. And I think both understood each other very well. And that's what I mean here. Now, I would say that in this particular interaction, 5 things stand out for me. I think India has been quite smart in handling those. 5 could turn into big advantages. One, we require huge energy. We have huge energy requirements, as they say. So more cheap oil and gas, this will be a key for our growth. Second, nuclear energy. The small modular reactors, they could be the future. And US is a manufacturer of that, and they want to sell it to us. Then partnership in AI and chips. AI, so much has been spoken about. India, US are actually natural partners, and they are working very, very closely. So if you look at the joint statement, there are several initiatives, including the National Science Foundation, led by Panchanathan, who just got the Padma Shri. Now, fourth, of course, there is a talk of merit-based immigration, and this helps H-1Bs. It also helps 300,000 Indian kids who are studying in the United States, most of them 2/3 in STEM areas. And finally, look, we have been able to get the trade negotiations started. There's a very clear indication that within 6 months, we should be moving towards a treaty or what is called a trade agreement. I think that's a big plus. But of course, look, the challenge is there, and we have to play it very smartly. Both the officials will look after their interests, but that's where a common ground will be found.
My last question to you, India has carefully so far balanced its relations with global powers, including the US, Russia, and China. How might a second Trump presidency affect India's diplomatic strategy, especially in the context of Indo-Pacific and BRICS? There is also an indication of a potential intervention, as Donald Trump said during the course of that press conference when asked specifically about China.
So, look, you have obviously pointed to a very interesting area. Now, China and the US, I would say, politics has become quite an important aspect because, look, China, there is negativity amongst the people. They see it as a competition. Now, President Trump has to negotiate within that. He has to work out within that. So there are 2 opinions within Trump presidency 2.0. One, of course, is the strategic side. And you can see the Secretary of State, NSA, and many other strong people on China who have taken important strategic positions. But you also see the commercial side. You have seen the TikTok. So there are commercial interests who want things to open up. And I must mention to you that do keep in mind that President Trump has a long memory. And he holds what he calls China virus as responsible for him losing in 2020. And that is reflected if you look at the statements of the current CIA chief and others. So it's going to be a combination. Now, as far as India is concerned, look, I think the very fact that the focus on Quad one of the first meetings that took place after Secretary of State was sworn in was of the Quad. All the Quad foreign ministers were invited and given prominent places. So, and if you look at even our joint statement, there's a lot of mention of that. So I think, look, you can't expect complete, what we'll say is that US will declare a war on China. Of course not. I mean, it has to negotiate its relationship within these challenges. But I don't think it will in any way negatively impact United States-India relationship. I think that partnership will get strengthened, and it's also reflected in number of areas, even if you look at technology, etc., and look at even the defense side. You can see that unsaid word about the strategic understanding between United States and India are very much there.
All right, Ambassador Sandhu, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to NDTV. We are slipping into a short break. Coming up next would be someone who is an expert on US-India policy studies. We'll be joined by Richard Rosso in just a bit. And to discuss more of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's successful defining visit to United States, we are being joined by Richard Rosso of Wadhwani Chair in the US-India Policy Studies, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Rosso, trade has been a contentious issue between India and the United States, particularly during Donald Trump's first term. Now that Donald Trump has gone ahead with the reciprocal tariffs announcement, do you foresee a shift in trade dynamics? And how should India really navigate potential tariffs or market access challenges?
Well, I think that we saw when Prime Minister Modi was first elected almost 11 years ago, this push to try to create a stronger manufacturing ecosystem. A lot of that was some of the big reforms that India did, like the goods and services tax. But there were a lot of new trade protections that India introduced at that time. You saw regular customs duty increases. You saw local manufacturing mandates. More recently, the quality control orders that might be a trade limitation. So for President Trump, where the entire world is basically open for a trade fight, India presents a pretty big target because of some of the things that Prime Minister Modi has done during his time in office. So not surprising that India would be targeted, but the upside of what we see for the commercial relationship is obviously huge. And the fact that this year in the budget, India introduced a number of customs duty reductions in areas the United States had on our short list. So I think that kind of blunted maybe some of the criticism that we might have seen. But for the same day as the summit, for President Trump to announce that we're going to do this massive review of every country's trade duties against the United States and offer similar duties against, India was actually called out a couple times in that statement. I suspect that there's a lot more to come in terms of the downside, but at least the Leaders Summit itself had a lot of upside to it in terms of looking at an aspirational trade agreement, things like that.
Yes, under the Biden administration, initiatives like IPEF and Quad have been key in shaping India-US strategic ties. How do you think this return of Donald Trump will ensure India has engagements in multilateral settings, particularly in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I would say, Indo-Pacific economic framework, I don't think a lot of companies view that as really a market opener around the world, mostly focused on some soft ways to expand cooperation. But at the end of the day, companies need market access. They need lower customs duties. They need restrictions on foreign investment to be removed. And IPEF really didn't have a lot of that. So I don't think IPEF was considered to be as groundbreaking as some of the big initiatives before, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's two big, I think, multilateral initiatives that the United States and India are going to cooperate on. The Quad, it existed before President Trump, but he upgraded it. And I know you've already seen in President Trump, the Trump administration's first major foreign policy engagement was a foreign ministers meeting of the Quad. So I think that will remain. It has some commercial cooperation elements, although a little bit more of it is on strategic. But the second is IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Now that you've got relative stability in the Middle East with the war, at least at a pause, the opportunity to build cooperation across the region, infrastructure development, and improve trade flows is on the table. So a couple of big multilateral initiatives, I think, that are going to yield some fruit.
All right, Richard Rosso, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. That's all from me. See you soon. Thanks so much for watching.